Hyun-woo stepped into the great council chamber for the first time. The room was bigger than anything he had ever seen. The ceiling went up so high that he could not see the top. Lights floated in the air without any wires or strings holding them up. The walls were made of some kind of stone that changed colors when he looked at it. He was nervous. Very nervous. Today was his first day as Earth's new representative to the Galactic Council. His people had trained him for 2 years to prepare for this moment, but nothing could have prepared him for what he saw now. 47 different alien species sat in the chamber. Some looked like giant insects with too many legs. Others looked like walking trees with glowing bark. There were creatures made of gas that floated in clear containers. Some aliens were so small that they needed special platforms just to be seen. Others were so big that they had to bend down to fit through the doors. Hyun-woo found his seat. It was marked with a small sign that said Terra in Galactic script. That was what the other species called Earth. He sat down and tried not to stare at his neighbors. To his left was a creature that looked like a walking crystal. Its body was completely see-through, and rainbow colors moved through it like water. To his right was something that might have been a mushroom, but it was as tall as a person and had 3 eyes on stalks. The session began when a deep voice filled the chamber. Hyun-woo could not see who was speaking. The voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. The 847th session of the Galactic Council will now begin. Today we will discuss the territorial dispute between the Zephani and the Nebulon over mining rights in the Kepler sector. Hyun-woo watched as representatives began to speak. They did so in a very specific order. First came the old species, the ones who had been part of the council for thousands of years. Then came the middle-aged civilizations, then the newer ones. And finally, at the very end, would come the humans. The crystal being next to him stood up. Its voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. I am Quinseth of the Veltari. We have been part of this council for 6,000 years. We support the Zephani claim based on historical precedent. They discovered the sector first. They have the oldest maps. Logic dictates that first discovery equals first rights. The mushroom creature spoke next. Its voice was like rustling leaves. The Borthak agree. We have similar laws in our space. First to find, first to claim. This is how civilized species behave. One by one, each species gave their opinion. They all sounded very smart and logical. They quoted laws and treaties that were older than human civilization. They showed holographic displays of charts and graphs. They talked about resource allocation and economic efficiency. But something bothered Hyun-woo. Every species was talking about the Kepler sector like it was just empty space with valuable rocks in it. No one mentioned that people actually lived there. Hours passed. Hyun-woo listened to 46 different species give their opinions. Some supported the Zephani, others supported the Nebulon, but they all talked about the same things: laws, resources, efficiency, profit. Finally, the voice from everywhere spoke again. The representative from Terra will now speak. Hyun-woo stood up. His legs felt weak. Every eye, tentacle, and sensor in the massive chamber turned to look at him. He had prepared a speech about human law and Earth's position on territorial disputes. But when he opened his mouth, different words came out. I have a question, he said. His voice sounded very small in the huge chamber. What about the people who live there? The chamber became completely silent. Not the kind of silence when people stop talking. The kind of silence when people stop breathing. Excuse me? Said Quinseth, the crystal being. What people? Well, said Hyun-woo. According to my files, there are about 50,000 Nebulon living in the gas clouds around the third planet. They have been there for over 200 years. And there are Zephani crystal gardens on the asteroid belt, where their children are grown. If we give the mining rights to one side, what happens to the other side's people? More silence. Hyun-woo could feel confusion coming from all around him. A new voice spoke up. It was rough and deep like rocks grinding together. I am Grelnos of the Mordak, young human. This is not how council business is conducted. We discuss law and logic. We do not discuss feelings. But these are not feelings, said Hyun-woo. These are facts. There are real people living in that sector. If the Zephani get exclusive mining rights, they will need to clear out the gas clouds. The Nebulon families will have to leave the only home their children have ever known. And if the Nebulon get the rights, they will need to expand their gas clouds. The Zephani crystal gardens will be destroyed. Hundreds of years of crystal art will be lost forever. He paused and looked around the chamber. Every alien face looked confused or annoyed. What I want to know is, Hyun-woo continued, has anyone asked these people what they want? Maybe there is a way for both groups to share the sector. Maybe they do not even want the mining to happen at all. Maybe they have ideas we have not thought of. The chamber erupted in noise. Aliens were talking to each other in dozens of different languages. Some sounded angry. Others sounded confused. A few sounded interested. The voice from everywhere spoke again. Order, order in the chamber. The noise stopped. The human raises. Unusual points, said Quinzeth slowly. But this is not how we make decisions. We follow law and precedent. We calculate the most efficient outcome. We do not base galactic policy on the wishes of a few thousand individuals. Why not? Asked Hyun-woo. This time the silence lasted even longer. Because, said Grelnos finally, that is not logical. Maybe, said Hyun-woo, but it is right. The session ended without a decision. As the aliens filed out of the chamber, many of them stared at Hyun-woo. Some looks were curious. Others were annoyed. A few seemed almost frightened. As Hyun-woo gathered his papers, Quinzeth approached him. The crystal being's rainbow colors were swirling faster than before. Human, it said, you have been in the council for exactly 1 day. Perhaps you should learn our ways before trying to change them. Maybe, said Hyun-woo, but maybe you should ask yourself why humans always speak last. And maybe you should ask yourself why, after I spoke today, everyone started thinking about things they had not thought about before. Quinzeth said nothing, but its colors swirled even faster as it walked away. Hyun-woo was left alone in the great chamber. He looked up at the ceiling that disappeared into darkness. For the first time since arriving, he was not nervous. He was curious. Something was happening here, something important, and he was going to find out what it was. 3 months had passed since Hyun-woo's first day in the council chamber. He was getting used to the strange routine of galactic politics. Every week, representatives from 47 different species would gather to discuss problems from across the galaxy. And every week, humans would speak last. So-jin was Hyun-woo's assistant. She was very good at finding information that other people missed. While Hyun-woo attended the council sessions, So-jin spent her time in the great library of Nexus Prime. The library contained records of every council session that had ever happened. I found something interesting, So-jin told Hyun-woo one morning. She was holding a datapad with thousands of numbers on it. What kind of interesting? Asked Hyun-woo. The kind that might explain why everyone gets so nervous when you ask questions, she said. I have been studying council decisions from the past 100 years. I wanted to see what happens after the council makes a decision. She showed him the datapad. The numbers were organized in neat columns. Before humans joined the council 50 years ago, the council made very logical decisions, very efficient decisions, and 73% of those decisions led to wars, rebellions, or complete disasters. Hyun-woo stared at the numbers. 73%? 73%, So-jin confirmed. But here is the strange part. After humans started speaking last in council sessions, that number dropped to 12%. That cannot be right, said Hyun-woo. I checked the data 5 times, said So-jin. I even asked the library computers to verify the information. The pattern is clear. Something about humans speaking last makes the council's decisions work better. Before Hyun-woo could ask more questions, an alarm sounded through the building. That meant an emergency council session was about to begin. Hyun-woo hurried to the chamber. When he arrived, the mood was different from usual. The aliens looked worried. Some were talking in hushed voices. Others sat in complete silence. The voice from everywhere spoke. Emergency Session 847 Alpha will now begin. We will discuss the Kethnari expansion into neutral space. A new alien stood up to speak. Hyunwoo had never seen this species before. It was tall and thin, with silver skin that seemed to glow. Its eyes were completely black and very large. When it spoke, its voice was smooth and confident. I am Thexi Moore of the Kethnari Empire. My people have grown beyond our current borders. We require more space for our expanding population. We have identified 3 star systems in neutral space that would serve our needs perfectly. Thexi Moore activated a holographic display. It showed a map of local space with the 3 star systems marked in red. These systems contain the resources we need. They are currently occupied by 3 minor species: the Luminids, the Fergani, and the Skotel. These species have small populations and primitive technology. Logic dictates that it would be more efficient for an advanced civilization like ours to make use of these resources. The chamber murmured in agreement. Several species nodded their heads or equivalent body parts. Another alien stood up. This one looked like a giant lizard with 6 arms. I am War Master Klex of the Draknari. We support the Kethnari proposal. Our military analysis shows that the 3 target species pose no threat to galactic stability. The transfer of territory could be accomplished with minimal resistance. More aliens spoke in support. The Kulesh offered economic incentives to help relocate the displaced populations. The Veltari quoted legal precedents about stronger species guiding weaker ones. The Mordak talked about the natural order of galactic civilization. Every argument was logical. Every point was backed up with data and calculations. The math was perfect. Finally, it was time for humans to speak. Hyunwoo stood up, but this time, he did not feel nervous. He felt sad. I want to tell you a story, he said. The chamber fell silent. Stories were not usual council business. 200 years ago on Earth, there was a small village in a place called Korea. The people in this village had lived there for many generations. They grew rice and raised children and made beautiful pottery. They were not very advanced compared to some of their neighbors. They had simple tools and simple lives. Hyunwoo paused and looked around the chamber. One day, a much larger and more advanced nation decided that the village was in a useful location. The big nation had better technology and more soldiers. Their leaders were very smart and made very logical decisions. They calculated that it would be more efficient for them to use the village location for their own purposes. Some of the aliens shifted uncomfortably in their seats. So the big nation came to the village. They offered to relocate the villagers to a different place. They offered money and new homes. They said it was for the greater good. They said it was logical and efficient. What happened? Asked Quinzeth quietly. The villagers were moved to a place far from their ancestral home. The children grew up without knowing where they came from. They grew up angry. They grew up hating not just the big nation that moved them, but the entire idea that stronger peoples could push around weaker ones. Some of those children became terrorists. Some started wars. Some spent their entire lives trying to destroy everything that reminded them of what had been taken from them. The chamber was completely silent now. The big nation got what it wanted, Hyunwoo continued. But 50 years later, they found themselves fighting constant wars with the children and grandchildren of the people they had displaced. The logical decision created generations of hatred and violence. Theximore spoke up. But surely you are not suggesting that 3 primitive species should be allowed to waste valuable resources. I am suggesting, said Hyunwoo, that we ask them what they want before we decide what is best for them. I am suggesting that we find out if there might be ways for everyone to benefit. Maybe the Kethnari could share the systems instead of taking them completely. Maybe the smaller species have knowledge or skills that could help the Kethnari in ways they have not considered. That is inefficient, said War Master Klex. Maybe, said Hyunwoo, but what if the children of the Luminids and Fergani and Skotel spend the next 100 years fighting the Kethnari? What if this logical decision today creates a war that lasts for generations? Is that efficient? The chamber erupted in discussion. Aliens were talking to each other in excited voices. Some were angry, others seemed thoughtful. A few looked frightened. The voice from everywhere called for order. "The council will recess for deliberation," it announced. As the aliens filed out, many of them looked at Hyunwoo with different expressions than before. Some still looked annoyed, but others looked curious, and a few looked worried. So Jin was waiting for him outside the chamber. "I think I know why the numbers changed when humans started speaking last," she said. "Why?" asked Hyunwoo. "Because everyone else thinks about today. Humans think about tomorrow." That night Hyunwoo could not sleep. He kept thinking about the data So Jin had shown him. 73% of council decisions had led to disasters before humans joined, only 12% after. Something important was happening in the council chamber when humans spoke last. Something that made the galaxy a safer place. But what exactly was it? And why did it seem like some of the older species already knew the answer? Taemin was walking through the quiet halls of Nexus Prime when someone called his name. He turned around and saw an old Veltari approaching him. Her crystal body was not bright and colorful like Quinzeth's. Instead, it was dim and cloudy, like old glass. Her movements were slow and careful. "You are the human xenopsychologist," she said. Her voice was very soft, like wind through leaves. "Yes," said Taemin. "I study how different species think and behave. Can I help you?" The old Veltari looked around nervously. The hallway was empty, but she still seemed worried that someone might be listening. "My name is Velkara. I am a historian. I have been alive for over 800 years. I have seen many things that most people have forgotten." She paused and looked at Taemin carefully. "I need to tell someone the truth about why humans speak last in council. But it must be secret. If the other species knew I was talking to you, there would be trouble." Taemin felt his heart beat faster. "What kind of truth?" "The kind that explains everything," said Velkara. "Meet me in the old archives tonight. Level 47, Section 12, come alone." That night, Taemin made his way to the deep levels of Nexus Prime. He had never been this far down before. The halls were darker here, and everything smelled old and dusty. When he found Section 12, Velkara was already waiting for him. "Sit down," she said, pointing to an old chair. "What I'm about to tell you is not in any official records. It was erased from the databases long ago. Only the oldest beings in the galaxy still remember." Taemin sat down. Velkara's crystal body glowed faintly in the darkness. 200 years ago, before your species even knew that other intelligent life existed, the Galactic Council faced a great crisis. We called it the Resource Wars. Many species were fighting over the same planets and star systems. Trade was breaking down. Some civilizations were close to collapse. She paused and her glow grew even dimmer. The council at that time was very logical, very efficient. We decided to solve the problem using pure mathematics. We calculated which species contributed the most to galactic civilization. We measured their technology, their trade value, their military strength, their population growth. Then we identified the species that were not contributing enough. "What do you mean, not contributing enough?" asked Taemin. "Species that used more resources than they produced. Species that were too small to matter in galactic trade. Species that were too peaceful to help with military defense. Species that were too different to fit into our calculations." Velkara's voice became even quieter. "We called it the Great Purge. 23 species were declared inefficient drains on galactic resources. The Council voted unanimously to relocate them to distant empty star systems where they would not waste valuable space." Taemin felt cold. Relocate them? That was the official term. But the distant systems we chose had no planets suitable for life. No resources to sustain civilizations. We told ourselves we were being logical. We told ourselves it was for the greater good. Velkara stopped talking for a long moment. In the silence, Taemin could hear his own breathing. "The 23 species died," she continued finally. "All of them. Billions of beings. Entire civilizations vanished from the galaxy. We eliminated them with mathematics and logic." "That is horrible," whispered Taemin. "It gets worse," said Velkara. "We thought the Great Purge had solved our problems. For a few years, everything seemed perfect. Resources were distributed more efficiently. Trade improved. Conflicts decreased. We congratulated ourselves on making such logical decisions. But something went wrong. Everything went wrong. Without the 23 species we had eliminated, the balance of galactic civilization collapsed. You see, we had not understood what those species really contributed. Some of them were natural mediators who helped other species resolve conflicts peacefully. Others were traders who connected distant parts of the galaxy. Some were artists and philosophers who helped civilizations remember what they were fighting for. Velkara's glow flickered like a dying candle. Most importantly, they provided different ways of thinking, different perspectives on problems. When we eliminated them, we eliminated the voices that might have warned us about what came next. What came next? Asked Timon. The century of blood, the darkest period in galactic history. Without the small, peaceful species to act as buffers, the larger civilizations turned on each other. Old rivalries became wars. Trade disputes became genocides. Every species became paranoid that they might be the next ones labeled inefficient. Timon tried to imagine 100 years of galactic war. The idea was too big and terrible to understand. For 100 years the galaxy burned, continued Velkara. Half of the remaining species destroyed themselves. Great civilizations that had existed for thousands of years simply vanished. We nearly ended all intelligent life in the galaxy because we thought logic and efficiency were more important than wisdom and compassion. How did it end? Asked Timon, slowly, painfully. The survivors were exhausted. They had learned through terrible cost that pure logic without empathy leads to destruction, that efficiency without wisdom leads to disaster. Velkara stood up and walked to an old computer terminal. She activated it with a touch of her crystal hand. This is a recording from the first council session after the wars ended, she said. A hologram appeared in the air. It showed the council chamber, but it looked very different. Only about 20 species were present, and they all looked tired and scared. An old Veltari was speaking. Timon realized it must be Velkara herself, 200 years younger. Have learned that logic alone is not enough, the younger Velkara was saying in the recording. We need wisdom. We need empathy. We need voices that ask not just what is efficient, but what is right. The recording ended. When humans first made contact with the galaxy 50 years ago, we were still recovering from the century of blood, said the present-day Velkara. Your first ambassador came to the council and did something we had not seen in decades. What was that? He asked about the people who would be affected by our decisions, not the calculations or the logic or the efficiency, the people, the children, the families, the dreams and fears and hopes that logic cannot measure. Velkara turned to look directly at Timon. We made humans speak last because you think differently than the rest of us. Every other species in the council approaches problems the same way. Identify the issue, calculate the optimal solution, implement it efficiently. But humans add something else. You ask questions that make us think about variables we did not know were variables. Like what? Like how will this decision affect people we cannot see? Like what will the children of today think about what we do? Like are there solutions we have not considered because we are thinking too narrowly? Timon understood now. You use us as a check on pure logic. More than that, said Velkara. We use you to remind us that behind every logical decision are real beings who will live with the consequences. Humans speak last because you are the only species that consistently asks not just, what is the optimal solution, but what kind of galaxy do we want to live in? They sat in silence for a while, surrounded by the old archives and the weight of history. Why are you telling me this? Asked Timon finally. Because some of the younger species do not remember the century of blood. They think the current system is inefficient. They want to go back to pure logical decision-making. They do not understand what that cost us before. Velkara's crystal body glowed brighter for a moment. And because I think your people deserve to know why you carry this burden. Speaking last is not an honor or a punishment. It is a responsibility. You are the conscience of the galaxy whether you know it or not. As Taman walked back through the dark halls of Nexus Prime, he thought about everything Velkara had told him. 23 species had died because the galaxy had valued logic over wisdom. 100 years of war had followed because no one asked the right questions. Now humans spoke last in every council session, asking the questions that other species forgot to ask, making sure that efficiency did not become cruelty, making sure that logic did not become blindness. It was a heavy responsibility. But as Taemin thought about it, he realized it was also an honor. Humans might be the youngest species in the council, but they had become its conscience, and the galaxy was safer because of it. The emergency alerts had been sounding for 3 days straight. Every ship in the galaxy was broadcasting the same terrifying message. The Void Plague had returned. Yunji stood in the council chamber and watched as panic spread among the representatives. She had only been Earth's ambassador for 2 weeks, replacing Hyunwoo, who had been promoted to lead the Human Diplomatic Corps. Now she faced the greatest crisis in galactic history. The Void Plague was not like any disease that affected living beings. It was something much worse. It consumed matter itself, turning entire star systems into empty space. 200 years ago, a small outbreak had destroyed 3 planets before burning itself out. Now it was back and it was spreading fast. The plague has already consumed the Helix system, announced the voice from everywhere. Long-range sensors show it is moving toward the populated sectors at an unprecedented rate. We have perhaps 6 standard weeks before it reaches the core worlds. A tall insectoid being stood up. Hyunji recognized him as High Calculator Zeknon of the Technari. His species were master engineers who built some of the most advanced technology in the galaxy. I have analyzed the plague's movement pattern, said Zeknon. His voice clicked and buzzed like machine parts moving. Based on its current trajectory and consumption rate, it will destroy 47 star systems within the next year. These systems contain approximately 12 billion intelligent beings. Holographic displays filled the air above the chamber. They showed the plague's path through space like a growing dark stain on the map of the galaxy. However, continued Zeknon, there is a solution. The Technari have developed antimatter bombs powerful enough to create a firewall in space. If we detonate these devices in a strategic pattern, we can create a barrier that the plague cannot cross. What would this firewall require? Asked Quinzeth. We would need to sterilize 12 star systems along the plague's projected path. These systems contain approximately 800 million beings, but their sacrifice would save 11 billion, 300 million others. The mathematics are clear. The chamber erupted in discussion. Aliens were talking rapidly in dozens of languages. But as Yunji listened, she realized that most of them were agreeing with Zeknon's plan. War Master Klex of the Draknari stood up. The Draknari military supports this proposal. We can evacuate key personnel and resources before the detonation. The loss of life, while regrettable, is acceptable when weighed against the alternative. More species voiced their support. The Silquan showed probability matrices proving that the firewall plan had a 78% chance of success. The Borthak offered to coordinate the evacuation of essential materials. The Kulesh calculated the economic costs and declared them manageable. Yunji watched as species after species agreed to destroy 12 star systems to save the rest of the galaxy. Their logic was perfect. Their mathematics were flawless. 800 million lives to save 11 billion. The choice was obvious. Finally, it was time for humans to speak. Yunji stood up, and the chamber fell silent. Everyone expected her to make an emotional plea for the people who would die in the firewall. Everyone expected her to argue against the logical choice. Instead, Yunji surprised them. You are absolutely right, she said calmly. The numbers do not lie. 800 million to save 11 billion. Mathematically, there is no question. The firewall plan is the optimal solution. The chamber was completely silent. Several aliens looked confused. They had expected the human to argue against the plan, not support it. However, continued Yunji, there is something your calculations are missing. She activated her own holographic display. It showed detailed information about the 12 systems that would be destroyed. The Void Plague is not just consuming, matter. According to our analysis, it is consuming information. Every system it destroys takes with it unique knowledge, perspectives, and solutions that no longer exist anywhere else in the galaxy. The display zoomed in on one of the doomed systems. In the Luminid system, there is a species that has been studying quantum consciousness for 3,000 years. They understand how thought and reality interact in ways that no other species has achieved. When their system is destroyed to create the firewall, that knowledge dies with them. She switched to another system. In the Fergani system, there is a species that has natural immunity to energy-based pathogens. Their biological structure allows them to survive exposure to things that would kill other species instantly. They might hold the key to understanding how the void plague spreads and how to stop it. Another system appeared on the display. The Scotel in this system have developed mathematics that work in nonlinear time. They can calculate probability chains that extend across multiple dimensions. Their computational methods might show us solutions we cannot see with standard analysis. Yunji paused and looked around the chamber. By destroying these systems to save ourselves, we might be destroying the very knowledge we need to find a real cure for the void plague. We would survive this outbreak, but what happens when it returns in another 200 years? What happens when it comes back stronger, and we no longer have the Luminid's understanding of quantum consciousness, or the Ferganis's natural immunity, or the Scotel's advanced mathematics? Zeknon clicked his mandibles together. That is speculation. The firewall plan is based on proven science and confirmed mathematics. You are right, said Yunji. It is speculation, but so is the assumption that the firewall will work perfectly. Your own data shows only a 78% success rate. What if the firewall fails? What if the plague adapts and finds a way through? Then we will have killed 800 million people for nothing, and we will still face the same crisis. She gestured to her display again. I propose a different approach. Instead of destroying the 12 systems, we evacuate their populations to human space. Earth has been preparing emergency colonies for situations exactly like this. We have the ships and the resources to move 800 million people. That is impossible, said War Master Klex. No species has that kind of evacuation capacity. Humans do, said Yunji simply. We have been building emergency response fleets since we joined the galactic community. We know that crises like this can happen, so we prepared for them. But even if you could evacuate everyone, said Quinzeth, that does not solve the plague problem. It will still consume the galaxy. Not if we use the evacuated populations to find a real solution, said Yunji. Move the Luminids to our research stations where they can work with human scientists on quantum consciousness studies. Move the Fergani to our medical facilities where they can help us understand biological immunity to energy phenomena. Move the Scotel to our computational centers where they can apply their mathematics to the plague problem. She looked directly at each representative as she spoke. Instead of destroying the knowledge we need, we concentrate it. Instead of sacrificing 800 million lives, we use those lives to save everyone. It is riskier than the firewall plan, but if it works, we do not just survive this plague. We become immune to it forever. The chamber was completely silent for a long time. The risk is enormous, said Zeknon finally. If your plan fails, the entire galaxy could be consumed. If your plan fails, said Yunji, we kill 800 million people and still lose the galaxy. At least my plan gives everyone a chance to live. How long would this evacuation take? Asked Quinzeth. 3 weeks to move everyone to safety. Another 3 weeks to establish the research partnerships. If we are going to find a solution, we should know within 6 weeks whether it is possible. That is exactly how much time we have before the plague reaches the core worlds, observed. War Master Klextent. More discussion erupted in the chamber. But this time the tone was different. Instead of resigned acceptance of necessary sacrifice, there was genuine debate about possibilities and alternatives. I have a question for the human, said a new voice. Yunji turned and saw that Velkara, the old Veltari historian, had entered the chamber. Her crystal body was glowing brighter than Yunji had ever seen it. Why are you willing to risk everything on this plan? Asked Velkara. The firewall approach guarantees that most of the galaxy survives. Your approach risks total annihilation. Yunji thought carefully before answering. Because, she said finally, I would rather risk everything trying to save everyone than guarantee survival by sacrificing some, because the knowledge we would destroy might be more valuable than the lives we would save. And because I think there is a difference between surviving and living. What do you mean? Asked Velkara. If we survive by choosing who lives and who dies based on mathematics, we become the kind of civilization that values efficiency over life. We become the kind of people who can calculate away 800 million lives and sleep well at night. Maybe we would survive the plague, but we would lose something more important than life. We would lose our souls. The chamber was silent again. But this time the silence felt different. It felt like the moment before a great decision. I call for a vote, said the voice from everywhere. All in favor of the firewall plan. About half the representatives raised their hands or equivalent appendages. All in favor of the human evacuation plan. The other half raised their hands. The vote is tied. According to galactic law, tied votes. 6 months had passed since the galaxy chose hope over certainty. The evacuation plan had worked, but not in the way anyone expected. Hyunwoo stood in the council chamber, now as the senior human diplomat. The room looked the same as always, but everything felt different. The representatives who gathered here had lived through something that changed them all. The final report on the Void Plague crisis has been completed, announced the voice from everywhere. Ambassador Hyunwoo will present the findings. Hyunwoo stood up. Even after all this time in the council, he still felt the weight of speaking last. But now he understood why that weight was important. The evacuation was successful, he began. All 800 million beings from the 12 threatened systems were safely relocated to human colonies and research stations. No lives were lost during the transfer. Holographic displays showed the new settlements scattered across human space. Former enemies were now neighbors. Species that had never met before were working side by side. But the real success was not the evacuation itself. It was what happened when these different species started working together. The display changed to show a research facility orbiting Earth's moon. The Luminids' understanding of quantum consciousness combined with human adaptability and Fergani biological immunity led to a breakthrough that none of our species could have achieved alone. We discovered that the Void Plague is not actually a disease or a natural phenomenon. The chamber became very quiet. It is a weapon, created by an extinct civilization millions of years ago as a last resort against an invasion that we now know was repelled by other means. The weapon was left dormant in deep space, activated automatically when certain energy signatures appeared. What kind of energy signatures? Asked Quinzeth. The kind produced by large-scale antimatter detonations, said Hyunwoo. If we had proceeded with the firewall plan, the antimatter bombs would have triggered a much larger plague outbreak. Instead of stopping it, we would have made it spread faster and farther. The silence in the chamber was absolute. The Skotel mathematicians calculated that the firewall plan had a 78% chance of containing the current outbreak, but a 94% chance of triggering a galaxy-wide plague event within 10 years. Their nonlinear temporal mathematics showed probability, chains that our standard analysis completely missed. War Master Kleck spoke up. So the logical solution would have destroyed us all. Eventually, yes, said Hyunwoo. But there is more. Working together, the evacuated species found not just the cause of the plague, but the cure. The display showed a new image, a device that looked like a crystalline flower with metal petals. The Luminids' quantum consciousness research revealed that the plague weapon responds to mental commands from its creators. The Fergani biological immunity allowed them to get close enough to study the plague directly, and the Skotel mathematics provided the computational framework to reverse engineer the control system. Are you saying the plague can be controlled? Asked Zeknon. More than controlled. Completely neutralized. The weapon has been deactivated permanently. The plague will never threaten the galaxy again. The chamber erupted in celebration. Aliens were cheering in dozens of different languages. Some were hugging each other. Others were performing what looked like victory dances. When the noise died, Velkara stood up. The old historian's crystal body was glowing brighter than anyone had ever seen it. "I request permission to address the council," she said. "Granted," said the voice from everywhere. Velkara walked slowly to the center of the chamber. For a moment she looked at each representative in turn. "I am 837 years old," she began. "I have served in this council for over 6 centuries. I have seen the best and worst that our civilizations can achieve. Today I want to tell you something that most of you have never heard." The chamber was completely silent. 200 years ago, this council made what we thought was a perfectly logical decision. We eliminated 23 species that we calculated were inefficient drains on galactic resources. The mathematics were perfect. The logic was flawless. And it led to the century of blood that nearly destroyed all intelligent life in the galaxy. Several of the younger representatives looked shocked. They had never heard this story. We learned, through terrible cost, that pure logic without wisdom leads to extinction. Efficiency without empathy leads to horror. When humans first joined our council 50 years ago, we were still recovering from that disaster. Velkara turned to look at Hyunwoo. "Your first ambassador did something we had not seen in decades." He asked about the people who would be affected by our decisions, not the calculations or the efficiency or the optimal outcomes. The people, the children, the families, the dreams and hopes that logic cannot measure. She faced the chamber again. "That is why we made humans speak last. Not because you are special, not because you are wiser than the rest of us, but because you think differently. Every other species in this chamber approaches problems the same way. Identify the issue, calculate the optimal solution, implement it efficiently. But humans add something else. You ask questions that make us think about variables we do not even recognize as variables. You consider consequences that our logic does not measure. You remember that behind every decision are real beings who will live with the results." Velkara's voice grew stronger. "In the Void Plague crisis, every species in this chamber except one supported the firewall plan. It was logical. It was efficient. It would have saved the most lives in the short term, and it would have doomed us all in the long term." She pointed to Hyunwoo. "Only the humans ask different questions. Not what is the optimal solution, but what knowledge might we be destroying? Not how do we minimize losses, but how do we save everyone? Not what is the most efficient choice, but what is the right choice?" The chamber was so quiet that Hyunwoo could hear his own heartbeat. "This council will now vote on a formal resolution," continued Velkara. "But first, I want every representative to understand what we are voting on." She activated a holographic display that showed the galaxy as it was today. "We are not just establishing protocols for better decision-making. We are not just creating safeguards against pure logic. We are recognizing that in a galaxy of infinite diversity, someone must always ask the questions that everyone else forgets to ask." The resolution appeared in the air above them. "The Wisdom Protocols," read Velkara. "All major council decisions must be evaluated not just for immediate efficiency, but for long-term consequences across generations. All decisions must consider not just mathematical optimization, but human impact. And yes, humans will continue to speak last, not as a burden or a privilege, but as a reminder that behind every logical choice are real people who will live with what we decide." All in favor? Every representative in the chamber raised their hand, tentacle, appendage, or whatever they used to vote. The motion passed unanimously. As the session ended, Hyunwoo found himself surrounded by representatives from dozens of species. They all wanted to thank him, or ask questions, or simply shake his hand. But it was Velkara who approached him last. "Your species carries a heavy burden," she said. "Being the conscience of the galaxy is not easy." "I am starting to understand that," said Hyunwoo, "but I think we can handle it." "Why?" asked Velkara. Hyunwoo thought for a moment. "Because we do not see it as a burden. We see it as a responsibility. And because we know that if we do not ask the hard questions, no one else will." "What kind of hard questions?" "Questions like, what kind of galaxy do we want our children to inherit? What kind of people do we want to be? What kind of civilization do we want to build together? Velkara's crystal body glowed warm and bright. That, she said, is exactly why humans speak last. As Hyunwoo walked through the halls of Nexus Prime, that evening he thought about everything that had brought them to this moment. The confusion of his first day in the council, the discovery of the pattern in galactic decisions, the revelation of the century of blood, the crisis that nearly destroyed them all, and now the understanding that humans had been given the most important job in the galaxy, to remember that logic without wisdom is dangerous, efficiency without empathy is cruel, and optimal solutions without consideration for real people are not optimal at all. It was a heavy responsibility. But as he looked up at the stars visible through the great windows of the station, Hyunwoo felt proud to carry it. In council chambers across the galaxy, humans would continue to speak last. Not because they had to, but because someone needed to ask the questions that others forgot to ask. Someone needed to speak for the people who had no voice. Someone needed to remember that behind every decision were real beings who loved and dreamed and hoped for a better tomorrow. And if that was humanity's role in the galaxy, Hyunwoo thought, it was a pretty good one to have.